Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold stream. On today's stream, we are taking a look at the best hand traps for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel with the current metagame. Now, the metagame currently is actually pretty solid when it comes to just engines, right? And there's a bunch of different ways that you can play out this metagame with a myriad of different options available to you when it comes to engine or hand traps or non-engine or board breakers or whatever it may be, right? There's a bunch of different things that you can do with the current metagame because just the power of the current top engines, there's a lot available to you, right? Even as far down as like SnowiKs, you have so many different things that you can do that, generally speaking, there's not a ton that is extremely good because there's not like a specific deck that's very powerful. So let's quickly go through. We have a whole bunch here. I'm not going to include these ones down here at the bottom for obvious reasons. We don't have some of them, and the other ones are just kind of not useful. Also, this is obviously for the ladder, so best of one, ranked, stuff like that. Let's quickly go through this, starting off with the auto includes Ash Blossom, Fualos, called by... Yeah, these ones are pretty simple here. All of these are auto includes for two reasons. One, they basically hit anything in any matchup, like with Maxi or with Fualos. Pretty simple. And two, they stop those other cards. That's it. We all know why they're here. It's kind of frustrating how omnipresent these individual cards are, but as time progresses, these tend to be less and less valuable, but overall they're still basically auto-includes. I've thrown them in basically every deck and have never really been dissatisfied with them. Sure, I don't necessarily enjoy having to play Ash Blossom, and it feels terrible playing if it's only there to answer things like Fualos, but it does help sometimes. Okay, now let's get into the interesting things. Ghost Spell. I actually think Ghost Spell is a pretty useful card. The problem with Ghost Spell is that most of the time I never want to have 3 of this. It never feels like it's warranted to have 3 copies of Ghost Spell. Not necessarily because it's not useful, but it's not always useful, right? It doesn't always have that immediate impact in specific matchups, but there's some matchups where it's extremely advantageous to have. So I'm gonna actually... I want to put this in useful because it is a very nice card, but I will put it in situational. There's a lot of times where just having access to that additional guy, and specifically dealing with graveyard hate for things like Yummy or Draco Tail or pretty much anything actually, is pretty nice, but not 100%. Magma. Magma is also situational. There's only a few decks that you'd really want to play it in, and that is basically decks that would either use more Bestials or that would use other dragons that you could search, right? So like Tenpai or Dragon Link or something of that nature. For the most part, not great. However, it's never terrible, right? It's one of the most powerful cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! So yeah, of course you could see it, right? Chaos Hunter is just not really worth it right now. There's not really any decks that banish consistently enough for it to be warranted. DD Crow is also, I'm going to say, situational. Theoretically, it's pretty good against, like, against Canine or against Yummy or against something of that nature. However, the problem with that is that you are giving up more impactful hand traps, which we will talk about later. So, for the most part, it's not exceptional, and it, again, doesn't hit everything, right? Like, it doesn't hit Draco Tail, it doesn't hit the new... Radiant Typhoon deck, you know, it hits some things, but not everything. So those are the thoughts. And unlike something like a Bestial, it doesn't put that body onto the field. So again, it's that situational graveyard hate, right? Similar to that of Ghost Spell. Droll. Droll is just pretty solid. I wouldn't say it's an auto include. It's very good against Vega Troll Canine, but it's pretty weak against Draco Tail. Things like Mitsurugi combo decks do have weaknesses into Droll, but also oftentimes have ways to play around Droll and still establish a fairly decent board. So it's a good card, but it's not something where I would immediately include it into a deck. So it is powerful, but not an auto-include. Gamma, I'm going to say for the most part, is just a don't... Okay, I'm going to claim Gamma as situational, and the reason for this is because you can also play Delta. Delta is a very powerful card and is absolutely worth it for the inclusion because negating spells specifically are very nice right now. Again, Draco Tail, very good spells to negate. You also have the Radiant Typhoon deck that's pretty popular right now as well, so being able to negate that as well, Very nice. And then on top of that, Gamma is insane, right? Being able to negate and destroy a monster is also very powerful. So if you're able to play all of those, it's nice. If you're able to do something with those as well, like for example, if the opponent were to do something on your turn and you can Gamma them, that's also a great inclusion. And then potentially, you know, doing something else along those lines. Like in Dragon Link, it's very nice. Other than that, it's okay. Imperm is useful. Imperm's always useful. It's a pretty solid staple card, simply because being able to utilize a trap card specifically to negate a monster effect is always nice. Lancia is just not really worth it right now. As much as I do genuinely believe that Malice is not dead, I don't think that Lancia is that big of a problem. There's not really a deck that banishes, so there you go. Skullmeister is just a worse version of a lot of these other cards when it comes to graveyard hate, so not really worth it. Was this one? Mourner? Ghost Mourner? It's hard to remember all of the names. Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill. The problem with this is I guess there is some application, but again, for the most part, you're just better off having targeted effect negation, because there's not really you don't specifically want targeted effect negation, so it's not like you want, for example, in the Snake Eye format, the reason this card was useful was because you just wanted the most amount of effect negations that you could get so that they didn't get their combo, whereas with this, or with this format, that's not really the case. You want things that can like interact with hand or with grave, more so than you would want something that only activates for field. Nibiru is always useful. As much as the canine decks do have a fairly solid answer to Nibiru, Nibiru is also one of the best cards to pair with almost any other individual trap or hand trap. And on top of that, it gives you insurance against, or when you do end up drawing a whole bunch off of things like Maxi or Fua Loss, to give you that inevitability of, here's a big board wipe, you have to kind of answer that. So again, pairing that with another hand trap makes it very powerful. And overall, while I don't necessarily think that this is an auto 3 of, in fact, I probably wouldn't play it at 3 just due to the fact that draw spells do exist. At the very least, I do think that it is still very powerful. However, again, Canine specifically and Draco Tail don't really play into it, but a lot of other decks do. So I don't think it's an auto cut, and I think it is still pretty good. Ghost Ogre's actually pretty good because of Yummy, but again, it's more situational. It's more useful if you have the ability to either summon the Psychic, like with Punk, or if you have the ability to use a Light, like with Dragon Link, or something else of that nature. Phantasme, I think, I'm just going to put it in don't. Being able to summon it is not difficult, but I also don't think that being able to reshuffle your hand and, like, effectively fix your hand is as valuable right now, so late into most combos. The best deck that you could use this against is Yummy, but there's also significantly better cards that you could use this against, and most other decks don't care too much about this card. There are things that you could do to interact with it, or I should say, there are things that make this useful, but I think for the most part, it's not worth it, and it's not worth taking up that additional slot because of how situational it is. There are a lot of decks that play into the Phantasme and do get you value, but you also don't gain anything other than a guy on field from utilizing this card. You're not stopping the opponent, you're not slowing them down, you're not generating your own advantage, you're just kind of fixing your hand most of the time. So overall, I don't think it's worth it. Let's talk about the Dominus cards here. First and foremost, the two newest Dominus cards, the Songs of the Dominator and Dominus Spiral, I think are for the most part not really worth it. As much as Dominus Spiral is actually a pretty good card, overall, there's not a ton of decks that want to make use of it. There's maybe one, and it's Man, but other than that, pretty much every other deck doesn't want to use this, whereas things like, of course, Dominus Purge are very useful just in general. Of course, it's more situational because of the decks that are cut off from being able to play the Dominus cards, or more specifically Dominus Purge. for the most part, it's still a solid card. Impulse is one of the few cards that I genuinely believe is... Honestly, it's probably an auto-include. Any deck that can utilize this card pretty much should be utilizing this card. It's extremely advantageous. The problem is, not a lot of decks actually can use this card right now, right? Yummy can't use it. I guess, like, Pure Mitsu could, which is one of the advantages to playing Pure Mitsu. But, I guess Malice can as well. Vanquishal K9 can't. The new Radiant Typhoon deck can't. The Yummy can't. What else? Draco Tail can't. A bunch of other decks can't. So for the most part, a lot of the meta decks cannot. However, if you can play around the restrictions of being able to activate this in hand, you absolutely should. I think this is an auto-include. Perulia. Perulia is actually really, really solid right now because of the fact that the K9 cards are pretty common, not just as a deck, but as an engine in other decks. It's pretty common to see these cards. On top of that, there's a bunch of other decks that also special summon from hand, notably Yummy. So, a bunch of cards do come out from the hand, so you do have the ability to draw additional cards there. Winter Cherries. Theoretically, it could be useful. Realistically, there's not a deck that wants to make use of this card, because not only would you lose the ability to use that extra deck slot, you'd also lose the ability to use that card yourself. So if you were to say something generic, like SP Little Knight, you just kind of be out of that card yourself. And it requires you to see specific matchups, which are not guaranteed, especially in a best-of-one ladder style format. It's just not really all that useful. If a format were more centralized around 1 to 2 decks, yeah, I could see this being useful. For the most part, that's not the case. Shifter, again, pretty much an auto-include in decks that could use... Actually, is there even a deck that can utilize this effectively right now? I know, like, some Vanquish Soul decks utilize this, and I actually just do not think that that is useful. There are some situations I think it would be advantageous to play something of this nature, but I don't think many of those situations will come up. I'm going to put it in Situational. This is a very powerful card. The problem is so many decks have the ability to play around this extremely well, right? Yummy can play around it, Mitsu can play around it, K9 can play around it, Vanquish Soul absolutely doesn't care about it. The Radiant Typhoon deck doesn't care. The what's the other one that I'm thinking of? Vanquish Soul, K9, Yummy, Draco Tail. Draco Tail cares. That's probably the only one that cares, but pretty much everything else doesn't. So that's why I think it's situational. If you end up seeing a lot of Draco Tail, maybe it's worth including in your deck, but for the most part, I really don't actually think it's all that useful. Spooky Dogwood, not great. Gaining life points is nice. You have to do something. Otherwise, your opponent will inevitably just kill you. So, there you go. Vados, terrible. Theoretically, it's useful against the Yummy decks, but that's the only real deck that it'd be useful against. Almost every other deck wouldn't care. So, there's that. Valor, not gonna lie, pretty useful card. Mostly due to the fact that, again, that targeted effect negation is pretty solid. It's not perfect, but for the most part, it is a useful card and something that would be playable in a lot of decks, right? Would have applications. Also, not having that once per turn is also very, very nice. So, there you go. Droplet. I'm not gonna lie, Droplet has been extremely good for me. I have felt like Droplet has been maybe one of the most useful cards I've played in the last couple of weeks. Mostly due to the fact that I'm playing cards and decks that make use of the Droplet. However, I also just feel that Droplet as a whole right now has a lot of application. I don't think that there is a specific deck that it does poorly against. Even Draco Tail, which theoretically it's bad against, simply being able to remove a card from the field in order to negate an effect, or more specifically, to dodge something like Flame, is very advantageous, right? You can just send the cards to the grave to negate maybe even a useless card, but just being able to send it to the graveyard means that it has that application, even in a matchup where it shouldn't, which makes it far more advantageous. That's also one of the reasons Double Cyclone is seeing play in a lot of side decks, because specifically against Draco Tail, you are able to go activate a spell, your opponent chains the Flame, and then you chain the Double Cyclone to pop your own card and their other back row, kind of getting a 2-for-1 trade there. So that's one of the same things that would apply to Droplet. I really think that this is an insane card and is really, really powerful right now. Meowls is okay. I don't think there's a ton of application for it, but you could play it in a deck like Tenpai or in a deck like... That's literally the only one that I could think of that wants to go second and play a whole bunch of draw spells. But you could play it in some other decks that maybe need to see just a large amount of cards. I forget which one this is. Is this Retaliating? I think this is Retaliating, which is the one that special summons itself and becomes a macro. Again, I don't remember. Regardless, most of the C's, Contact, Retaliating, and there's another one that sees some pretty consistent play. For the most part, I don't think that those are very useful overall. I think that they're mostly situational. You can utilize them, being able to, you know, chain to a Dracotail trap and special summon a guy, or a Dracotail spell and special summon a guy to kind of lock them out of the game is nice. Like, it's an auto win. However, the problem arises where if you are against almost anything else, it just doesn't matter, right? It's like, cool, against Vanquishal, they don't care. Against Mitsu, they don't care. Against Yummy, they don't care. Against even Radiant Typhoon, they don't care, right? So there's a lot of instances like that where it's just not useful. So Sheena is literally only useful in Radiant Typhoon, so it is the definition of situational. Super Polymerization I've also really liked recently as well. I think board breakers are also just kind of on the up right now due to the fact that the decks end boards that are currently being made are not exactly exceptional, and a lot of times what ends up happening is that they are making a mid end board, but have a lot of either recursion with things like the Yummy cards, or have the ability to play out from the hand, or have a bunch of non-engine or something of that nature with like Vanquishal Canine or Dracotail or something else of that nature. So being able to like effectively break the board with 1 to 2 cards and then just play with engine tends to feel a lot better, right? And I think Super Poly kind of fits that really well. It effectively deals with the board with 2 cards, right? The Super Polymerization and a discard, and then with the rest of your hand, you can play into whatever the opponent has in their hand. So that's generally where I feel like Super Poly is fairly useful. I'm not too big of a fan of the triple tax. I think that they're okay, but they're mostly going to be insulation for combo decks, and that's more or less it. The Izuna, which I'm basically going to count as the Izuna and the Lupus package with the bare minimum of canines, I'm actually going to put pretty much in don't. Unless you are playing the full package, it's not really worth it to play just the, like, 4 canines. Because, while yes, they are a solid package, almost everyone is prepared for these cards and are prepared to deal with Inazuna hitting the field, right? So, for the most part, it's not worth it. Right? That's also one of the reasons why I feel like board breakers in particular happen to be a little bit better, because you don't get to trigger the Izuna, right? They don't trigger that card, and it just kind of locks it in the hand, making it a little bit less useful. Overall, of course, the canine package is good, right? The canine engine is a very solid engine, but just the Izuna Lupus engine, which is basically just to make a rank 5 or sometimes just Typhon, not really worth it. You're better off just playing something else. Either play a larger package of the canines or cut them entirely for a board breaker or a better hand trap or something of that nature. Anti-Magic Arrows isn't really worth it unless you're playing nothing. Dimensional Fissure, I think, could be useful. Similar in nature to the other macro style effects. This one is arguably better because you can use it going first and technically going second. But the problem with it going second is that by that point, most decks don't actually care about the graveyard. The only reason Dracotail cared up until, or like against Shifter or Retaliating or something of that nature, is because that means when they do their combo, they can't. Right? They lose a lot of that interaction. Whereas if you activate Dimension Shifter after they've already done their combo, they don't care. And as far as going first goes, I guess it's useful. Like, it's not terrible, but you probably are already doing something to help you win the game, so you don't necessarily need an auto win against one specific deck, and it'd be better to have a wide sweeping card. I'll put it in situational. I think it's okay, but it's not great. Kurikara is also situational if there are a lot of lighter dancers running around. That's like the only card that really matters for this. It's useful, right? For Vanquish Soul Canine, when that deck came out, a lot of people switched to playing Luna Light, so maybe you're seeing a bunch of Luna Light because of that. And it's also a fire, so there you go. Other than that, it's not great. Cosmic Cyclone, not really worth it. Evenly Matched is also pretty okay. I don't think a lot of decks can make use of the Evenly Matched effect, but board wipes in general are pretty solid right now. Most notably, I think that not Harpy's Feather Duster. We're just going to talk about board wipes in general here. Raigeki, I think, is probably one of the better board wipes right now, due to the fact that it just absolutely destroys Yummy, and it's very strong against Vanquish Soul Canine, unless they have access to the trap, in which case it's not great. But if they don't, if you're able to slow them down enough to where they don't get access to either the field spell or the trap, or the trap, it's pretty useful. Other than that, most board wipes aren't exceptional, just due to the fact that so many decks can play out of the hand now. So there you go. And this one, the meta is, I guess it's okay. The only reason you would set Blackout Laughs is off of the Triple Tactics Thrust, so these kind of just go together. But for the most part, like, you wouldn't use that any other time. And that's it for the tier list. I think it's pretty simple, but yeah, overall the metagame feels. I haven't felt like I've needed a ton of hand traps, nor have I felt like I've needed a ton of board breakers. And I felt like a lot of the engines are very powerful right now, which makes it very nice to be able to play a wide array of different things. And you're not like forced into playing Droll or forced into, Nibiruing your opponent or what have you, right? It doesn't feel like you're locked in one capacity or another. I don't know. Let me know down below if you guys agree with that. Maybe you think that you have to play a certain card. Let me know. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, a like is very much appreciated. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye.